Hi everyone, Paul Seabridge here. So in this video, I'm going to explain what a term sheet is. In the US, it's more commonly referred to as an LOI or a letter of intent, and how to present it to a business owner once you've negotiated an offer or a deal. So firstly, let me just introduce myself. I'm Paul Seabridge. I'm a global entrepreneur, #1 best-selling author on Amazon. I'm founder of Opulentia Capital, a private equity mergers and acquisitions firm that's transacted almost $1/3 billion worth of deals, covering 100 transactions in 11 countries across 29 different industries. You can learn more about what we do at www.buybuildsell.net. So firstly, let me explain what term sheet is. Effectively, I describe it to the business owner as the roadmap for all the parties concerned that we hand over to the lawyers to use as a base for crafting the legal documentation based on what the key parties have agreed as part of the deal. So it's not a comprehensive document. It maps out the core components of the deal. So let's have a look at an example of a term sheet and how we'd explain it to a business owner. Bear in mind that this is a standard template that we use, and this isn't necessarily always going to have all of these bits in there, because there's obviously some bits that we would amend. So if you were a business owner, this is how I'd be explaining it to you. So this is a term sheet. It's not binding, so it's really just a roadmap that we use to map out the core components of the deal, what we've all agreed. We hand this then over to the lawyers, who will then use that to produce all the legal paperwork so that we can get this deal done based on these on these terms. Whilst to say it's not binding, there are a couple of sections that are actually binding. So the first one is confidentiality, the second one is exclusivity, the third one is fees, and this agreement is based on English law. If we were doing the deal in England, if it was in the US, it would be based on whatever state we're doing the deal in there. So those sections are binding, but everything else is non-binding. So firstly, we've got the definitions used in the deal. So we would put the name of the company here. This is the company that we wish to buy with its company number. We would then, if the deal was based on completion accounts and we had a target completion net assets, and the net assets that the deal was based on, then we would obviously define that here by putting the amount in. The consultant to the deal is Opulentia Capital, so we act as basically the people that are putting the deal together, and will also become shareholders within the SPV that we use to acquire the business. Consideration is mapped out in clause 2. EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization. Premises, if there's premises involved and we're buying them or leasing them, then we would mention them here. The purchaser will be a newly formed special purpose vehicle as designated by the consultant. So effectively, we set up a new limited company. The sale shares is basically the issued share capital of the company if we're buying all of the shares, which in most of the time we tend to buy 100% of the companies that we get involved in. But if we were buying maybe a majority stake, then obviously we would state so here. The seller will be the names of all of the shareholders mapped out here. If there was a subsidiary company, then this would be explained here. If we were using, so if this was a UK-based deal and they've accumulated surplus cash, then again, this would be defined here. So in the UK, if it's not uncommon for a business owner to accumulate cash over many years, maybe they take out what they need to support their lifestyle, but maybe there's a surplus amount that's accumulated over the years. Rather than taking that out as a dividend before completion, if we include it in the sale and pay it out at completion, effectively, if it's structured in the right way, they only pay between 10 and 20% capital gains tax at the time of recording this video. So obviously, if that was part of the deal, it would be defined and mentioned here. Obviously, if it wasn't applicable, then of course that would be removed. Target net assets would be whatever we're basing the deal on or what we think it's going to be at completion. Working capital, if we're expecting them to leave cash behind or working capital behind, then again, we would define that here. So the consideration is, we would say here the purchase price for the company is X. If there was an earnout, it would be X plus the earnout consideration. Obviously, if earnout's not applicable, it would be removed. And if we're then doing completion accounts, then we would adjust the difference between what we're basing the deal on at completion net assets versus the target net assets, and we'd make an adjustment thereafter. The consideration will be paid as follows: an amount equal to X payable in cash at completion, and then an amount equal to X payable in cash in equal, I don't know, monthly, quarterly, annual installments over whatever period of time we've agreed. If we're adjusting for completion accounts, then we would obviously explain that we'll adjust it with completion accounts post deal. Usually we do that within 120 days, and we would basically pro rata any difference or adjustment in the deferred consideration. Obviously, if there's an earnout, that would be defined in section 2.4. If it wasn't, then obviously we'd remove that. Funding. So the way that we're funding this is the initial consideration is made up of new debt injected to the balance sheet. So effectively, we are borrowing money against the assets of the company. In addition to, if surplus cash is applicable, then obviously that will be also defined here. And then in terms of how we structure this, it depends on the country in which we're transacting, but there's really usually two ways to do this. One would be effectively a paper loan from the target company in terms of where we borrow all of the money against the assets. That's then loaned to the purchaser, i.e. the SPV, and then the purchaser then pays that money over to the seller. Effectively, the money is generally held by the lawyers on completion, and we don't actually physically send the money to the seller, but obviously on paper that's how it works. An alternative way would be to use alphabet shares, which is a little bit more complicated, but there's a few different pros and cons to doing both. We're not going to get into that into this video, but basically we would explain the mechanism for that at this point when we're going through the term sheet. And guarantees, if we're offering any, then we will go through this section. If we're not, then we've removed this from the term sheet. But it's not uncommon for us to offer some form of security for any deferred payments. Sometimes that could be a debenture or fixed charge over the assets of the company. But generally, that security would always sit behind the main lender that's going to fund the leverage buyout. If the seller's going to be involved in the business moving forward, whether that be short term for a handover or long term or indefinitely, then we would define that here, that such and such will remain in employment with the company. And either we'd say on terms to be agreed, or we define what the day rate or salary or whatever is going to be in here. Then the section 6 is the terms of the sale and purchase agreement. So here we would say this is not comprehensive, but these are I guess the main areas that we would have defined in the SPA, the sale and purchase agreement. So we would expect customary representations and warranties to be included in the SPA that we're obviously going to rely upon. Warranty claims will be capped for a period of time following completion, and tax warranties generally tend to be capped at 7 years. That period of time is negotiable, but typically that tends to be 5 years. So we've got basically 5 years to rely on the warranties, and if we find any issues where those warranties don't stand up, then potentially we could claim against those warranties should we choose to do so. Warranty claims will only apply in the event of an individual claim being more than £5,000, so that we're not going to bother them with really immaterial small items. And we'll have the right to set that off against a deferred. So if we made a warranty claim, we could basically offset whatever that warranty claim is against the deferred. So basically don't pay the deferred until such point as that's all been resolved through a claims process, which is all defined in the SPA. The seller will provide indemnities to the purchaser in terms of any actual or potential liabilities identified as a result of the purchaser's due diligence. So that could be maybe they've borrowed some money, maybe they provided personal guarantees. There could be some indemnities that be required for that. And the sale and purchase agreement will contain non-compete, non-solicitation clauses for usually a period of 3 years post the seller leaving the company, irrespective of whoever gave the notice, because at the end of the day, you wouldn't want to buy the business, the seller to leave and then set up in competition with you. I think that's fair and reasonable to expect. Then the SPA will also include the following conditions that need to be met. So firstly, we need to satisfy ourselves with legal and financial due diligence. So obviously, we're going to work through that process. That there's not going to be any material difference in the net asset position or the financial position of the company between us signing this term sheet and actually doing the deal. So for example, if profits nosedived or the balance sheet was materially different, then potentially we might not proceed with the transaction. Execution of employment service agreements between the company and key management, clearly self-explanatory. Receipt of final approval of the directors of the purchaser. Obviously that will all be provided because we are the purchaser, we'll be the directors of the purchaser, and we'll provide that approval subject to satisfactory due diligence and all of the points mentioned here. Obviously, is being satisfied with the disclosure letter produced by the seller. So the seller will provide a load of warranties, and we'll rely on those warranties unless they make a formal disclosure against those warranties to say, whatever the situation is, and we need to be comfortable with the content of that disclosure. And then receipt of any corporate or third-party approvals where that's applicable. So, for example, if there's any change of control clauses in any key contracts, whether that be lending, whether that be leases, whether that be supplier agreements, customer agreements, then we may need to seek third-party approvals as part of the ability to do the deal. And due diligence, we've mentioned we're going to issue a checklist to work through the process for us to be satisfied. Confidentiality is a binding clause, and the way I explain this is that ultimately we've signed a non-disclosure agreement, but effectively we're going to share info with you, you're going to share info with us, and we agree to keep that confidential amongst ourselves and our professional advisors, and won't share it anywhere else. Exclusivity is also a binding clause. So what we would say here is that there's a lot of time and effort that goes into making these deals happen. So, going through the due diligence, the legals, all of those sorts of things, we're going to start to incur a lot of costs and time in trying to figure out how we do this deal. So we expect a period of exclusivity whilst we do that. So we say, it's fair for us to ask you for 6 months exclusivity, where whilst we work through that process, you won't sell the business somewhere else, you won't negotiate with anybody else, and you'll give us the opportunity to complete all of those things for us to hopefully move to a satisfactory completion. Generally, we don't pull out of deals once we sign a term sheet unless we found something absolutely fundamental, and I can count on one hand how many times we've done that. So usually at this point, we've already done our initial due diligence that we're happy with, so it's unlikely, unless we found something really fundamental, that we would back out. Fees, we're going to incur fees, they're going to incur fees, professional fees, and we both agree to cover our own fees rather than covering each other's. This agreement will be executed using electronic signatures. So after the call, we'll issue this on a DocuSign for you to sign, and this agreement will then be based on the local laws of the country in which we're operating, in this example, England and Wales. Obviously, they then sign it, we sign it. We then have an appendix where we sort of issue the share capital table. If there's any subsidiaries, we list them here. We then have this here, Appendix 2, which is basically the sort of key milestones. So this really just acts as a roadmap to keep everybody focused. So usually we say once a term sheet's agreed, we usually complete due diligence within 4 to 8 weeks. We have the sale and purchase contract issued within 8 weeks. We have that all agreed within 10 to 12. And then we work to a completion within 3 to 4 months from today. They're not binding dates, but it keeps everybody focused on, look, this is what we're trying to hit each milestone by this date. And then Appendix 3 will be a screenshot of the P&L and balance sheet and the financial analysis that we did, that basically shows what we believe the financial position of the company to be. So if we see any material differences in that, obviously it's mapped out there in the term sheet. So yeah, really simple 6-page document that we can explain in really, I think, plain language to a business owner, and yeah, that's how we present a term sheet, and yeah, hopefully agree a deal. So yeah, that covers that. So yeah, in summary, term sheet is that roadmap for doing the deal. So does all of that sound a little bit complex and scary? Well, we help entrepreneurs buy multi-million-pound businesses within 18 months guaranteed, and I've got a whole team here at Opulenza Capital that can do all of this for you, including putting term sheets together and presenting them to business owners once we've agreed a deal. So I'd love to hear your comments on this in the comment section below, and if you've liked this video, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you haven't watched the video on www.buybuildsell.net about how I and my team help people buy a multi-million-pound business within 18 months, then please do head over to the website. Once again, www.buybuildsell.net. So that's it for this video. Thank you for watching.